It's a story the entire world is following: President Trump's near assassination.
It's indicative of a desire to do a grand, sweeping, almost romantic in their mind gesture to get attention and to fight back against, rail against a system that they feel has aggrieved them in some way.
But just 1 week since the shooting, investigators are still scratching their heads when it comes to a motive.
I think anything's possible. I wouldn't rule out anything. Somebody will know something. Something will be written somewhere. It has to be. They can't keep it to themselves. It's too big.
As the FBI digs into the gunman's background, we're learning conflicting things about his political leaning.
Could be a variety of things. Or it could just be a confused young man who is still figuring himself out, what he stands for.
Was former President Trump his ultimate target?
For him specifically to go after President Trump, it could be that he has no specific issue with President Trump himself. It could be that he is the higher profile of the two at the moment, seemingly ahead in the polls, and he wanted to influence history. He maybe wanted to derail a potential re-election of President Trump.
But experts say the shooter had pictures of Trump and Biden on his phone, but also other politicians too.
These individuals, some of them he may idolize, and some he may demonize in his mind.
Then there's the gunman's troubled history of solitude.
It's not uncommon for people to not ever utter a threat, yet pose a significant one.
To understand more about the shooter's background and to determine how close we are to learning a motive, I sat down with retired NYPD Sergeant Dan Murphy.
It is entirely possible this was done to impress a girl. It was entirely possible this was done to hurt his parents. There's a variety of reasons, and we will find that out soon enough, I think. There's going to be some evidence and some motive uncovered at some point. Whether that's released to us immediately or down the road remains to be seen.
Officials say the man responsible for the shooting is 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks of Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, south of Pittsburgh. He drove the some 50 miles to Butler, Pennsylvania on July 13th for former President Trump's final rally before the Republican National Convention. Just minutes after Trump took the stage, gunshots erupted. The gunfire grazed former President Trump's right ear and hit 3 other people. 57-year-old David Dutch and 74-year-old James Copenhaver were both injured, and 50-year-old Corey Comptor was shot and killed during the incident as he shielded his family from gunfire. Crooks himself was gunned down by snipers just seconds after pulling the trigger. He died on the scene. In the days following the shooting, officials descended upon Crooks' Bethel Park, Pennsylvania home searching for clues. So far, there's no report of a suicide note, journal entry, or manifesto of any kind, and thus no obvious motive. And the question on everyone's mind right now is motive, and it's something that we don't quite know yet. So why is it so difficult for investigators to pin down a motive?
They may know a lot more than they've said to date. I think that's probably a pretty fair assumption. Individual like this, they're going to look at everything he has written. And nowadays, people write on their blogs, they write on their social media. Individuals like this can't help but let somebody know when they're planning something like this.
In the preliminary investigation, officials found explosive devices in the gunman's car and home. After the shooting, he was found with a remote transmitter in his pocket that could have been intended for those explosives. As investigators are looking through physical evidence, they're also searching his digital files. Shortly after the shooting, his cell phone was sent to Quantico, Virginia, to be examined by FBI techs. What we do know about the investigation so far is that they went through his cell phone, through his home, his bedroom, kind of looking through things. What else would investigators be kind of zeroing in on during their investigation?
You need to talk to everybody that knows him. You want to talk to his friends, find his contacts in the phone, get statements from people. You're going to want to get the phone company to get you a history of all his text messaging. They're going to look at his search history to see whether or not he has looked up things, and he probably has. People like this, generally younger people especially, will look up to people who've done things like this in the past. They'll idolize a Lee Harvey Oswald, or they'll idolize someone else who made themselves famous through an infamous act. Looking up that search history, looking up a variety of things with regards to the rifle, the weapons use. Apparently, he bought ammunition that day. He may have done a little bit of history on the Secret Service and looked at video of past rallies, etc. He probably did a bit of homework.
Initially, there were reports that the gunman posted to social media writing, quote, July 13th, the day of the shooting, will be my premiere. The FBI later said they believe that account doesn't belong to the gunman, but the confirmed information they found about the gunman so far is conflicting. First, there's his political history. He registered as a Republican, and his former classmates say he always leaned right. But investigators say he donated $15 to a committee supporting Democrats in 2021. There's some unique and conflicting information because we know that he was registered as a Republican, but then he donated to a Democratic organization. So we're kind of getting both sides of the political sphere here. Why may that be, this conflicting info?
Well, I think a lot of young kids, I know that when I was 17 or 18 and I was registering to vote, I registered what my parents were, because that's kind of what you do. Your parents are very influential in your life. And then you get a little bit older and you may start thinking for yourselves, or you may start shifting your think to your friends in their group think, and this becomes your way of rebelling against your parents' older school ideas, maybe. Could be a variety of things. Or it could just be a confused young man who is still figuring himself out, what he stands for. Or he may have an actual distaste that has grown in his mind for Donald Trump for a variety of reasons. That could be egged on by the media. That could be egged on by his social group and his circle. It could be a mental health issue where he has fixated on Donald Trump and he has decided that he is the enemy, he's evil. And you don't have to look hard in our current media to find people saying just that. People who perhaps should be more responsible with their speech can influence young people, or anyone for that matter.
But this political disparity continues with info from the gunman's phone. We also know that there were some images found on his phone. So we have obviously pictures of Trump, Biden, but then there's a couple more people that were kind of interesting to me. Rudy Giuliani, Fani Willis, House Speaker Mike Johnson, and then House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. And again, we have people on both sides of the political sphere. What do you make of all of those images found on his phone?
It's interesting not getting inside his head, not knowing more. I think if you start reading his messaging and you start looking at his social media, looking at the things found inside his bedroom, will give you an indication of his priorities, his interests, and his focuses. Now, these individuals, some of them he may idolize, and some he may demonize in his mind. So it's hard to say unless there are comments written under each picture, or they're in a separate category. Let's say I have a file of people I hate, people I love. It's not uncommon for people like this to collect things, pieces of information and data that they learn about people, and decide an opinion on them right there based upon that. So I find it interesting. He seems to be all over the board. You're right. But there's more to it. We will learn more, or at least the investigators probably at this point already know a lot more than they have said.
And what's interesting too is that, at least according to the reports we've seen released by the FBI, that there's no threatening language here. That we have these photos, but there's no like political threats or assassination mentions, anything like that. So it's kind of interesting that we're seeing these people's names and photos, but no real plan that was written out.
Right. I have done a lot of work in my corporate work in the world of threat assessment. And one of the things that is common is understanding the nature of threats is very difficult for people, because sometimes people who pose the most significant threat never utter a threat or issue a threat, and vice versa. So in this case, it's not surprising to me that he would not have written any sort of a threat or even verbally communicated. What he may do is just get people excited. He's excited about what he's going to do, and let people know he's excited about something without specifying what it is. It is not uncommon for people to not ever utter a threat, yet pose a significant one.
While there may not have been an outward mention of the attack on President Trump, it's possible the gunman had made threatening statements in the past. Former classmates of the gunman have since said publicly he was an outcast who was bullied every day. Others say people used to describe him as the one who would shoot up the school. There may have been a history with threats, and this is just related to his high school. So some reports say that he apparently threatened to shoot up his high school about 5 years ago. So much so that some kids even stayed home from school that they were nervous. Nothing came of it. He wasn't suspended, anything like that. But is that an obvious red flag?
Yes, anything like that is an obvious red flag. Threatening to shoot up your school is something where he probably, there are legions of people around the world who idolize the Columbine high school shooters from 1999 still to this day. And they look at them as trailblazers in the world of making a statement. To some of these people, living in infamy is better than living in obscurity. And they will idolize these moments of control over systems that they feel have controlled them for too long. So, having done that in the past is not surprising to me, um, that it comes out at this point about this young man, because it's indicative of a desire to do a grand, sweeping, almost romantic in their mind gesture to get attention and to fight back against, rail against a system that they feel has aggrieved them in some way.
In terms of the political system, were other figureheads also at risk? We know that the motive is what's on everyone's mind. Why did this happen? But people are also wondering, is it possible that President Biden was at risk too and he was planning something there? What's your take on that?
I think anything's possible. I wouldn't rule out anything. Um, for him specifically to go after President Trump, it could be that he has no specific issue with President Trump himself. It could be that he is the higher profile of the two at the moment, seemingly ahead in the polls, and he wanted to influence history. He maybe wanted to derail a potential reelection of President Trump. There may have been plans for him to go after President Biden. I think, however, it's pretty much understood by people who do this that this one act that they're doing like this is going to be their last act. So if you're going to do it, this is the one you're going to do. It's the most important one to you. There's a potential that there were other people that were in his line of sight. It just so happened that President Trump came to a rally, had a rally in his hometown, which made it very convenient for him. And that could be the reason why he was chosen.
But is it also possible that the assassination attempt had nothing to do with politics? When I think of past assassination attempts, I obviously jump right to Ronald Reagan. And what was interesting in that situation is John Hinckley Jr. apparently tried to kill the then president to impress Jodie Foster, an actress. So it wasn't necessarily politically driven. Is it possible that this incident with President Trump was not politically driven?
It is possible. I think, given the amount of attention that it seems that he has given on his phone initially towards political figures, he does have a political awareness at least. It is entirely possible this was done to impress a girl. It was entirely possible this was done to hurt his parents. There's a variety of reasons, and we will find that out soon enough, I think. At least the investigators will. Whether they share it, I don't know. But that grand, sweeping, very twisted, romantic gesture that John Hinckley did, that could be the case here as well. We don't know yet.
Ahead of the shooting, the gunman purchased ammunition both at a gun shop in Pennsylvania and online. The weapon he used for the shooting, an AR-15 style rifle, was borrowed from his father. Apparently, he asked his dad to borrow the gun, saying he was planning to go to the shooting range, something he'd done in the past. Former classmates also say the shooter had a history with guns and often dressed in camouflage or hunting outfits. Do you think this fascination with guns or weaponry also played into this?
Absolutely. I believe it does. Weapons represent different things to different people. To people like him, they represent power. They represent the ability to fight back. They represent the ability to make a statement in a world where they're seen, or at least in their own mirror when they look, they see an inconsequential person who will not make a mark in this life. And that weapon is their pathway to getting themselves what he probably wanted. I think you'll see, we've seen in the Virginia Tech shooter, he kills a few people, then he makes the time to go to the mailbox and mail his his statement and his video and his still pictures imagery to NBC News, specifically because he wanted to be on the front page, even in death. That is their dream and their goal. So in this case, the fascination with weapons to me is just another means of how do I get to my objective, and the weapons is the way to do that.
Murphy says investigators will dig deep into the gunman's history and compile information from his entire lifetime. What do you think is going into the profile of this shooter? I mean, we've talked a lot about his background, but is that something that investigators are trying to come up with, a profile, so to speak?
I think they are, absolutely. You want to know your motivation. You want to know the life circumstances of the shooter. This is exactly what happens in all of these types of cases, mass shooter cases. What brought this person to this point in life? Was there an issue from birth, a brain defect? Was there fetal alcohol syndrome involved? Was there drugs, abusive drugs? Was it prescription drugs that caused ideation of violence and acts like this? Was there bullying that was influential? Was he sexually abused as a child? All of these things can be factors that can come to play with pushing someone to a brink of violence like this young man did the other day. And I think that a complete picture of him, it won't be done until all of this stuff is learned, which is why a thorough investigation, interviewing people from school, interviewing counselors, friends, relatives, is all so important to get a clear picture of what drove this young man to this point. And it helps us going forward as we deal with young people who are um, idealizing things or who are looking in such a way as though they might be moving towards violence or great acts of revolution per se in their mind against the system. So this individual may have a variety of things, or he may have very little of that, and it doesn't really matter. So I think profiles are pretty they're not, hot and cold or black and white. They can be very different, varying grays. And this individual, we will see what comes out on him. It'll be very interesting to me, at least.
Meanwhile, investigators have conducted hundreds of interviews, hoping to learn more about the shooter's background and a potential motive. You've mentioned several times interviews, and we know that the FBI have done at least 200, probably more at this point, but we're less than a week out from this shooting. So I know this investigation is going to be pretty lengthy to kind of get inside of his mind. Is it possible that investigators speak with everyone preliminarily and then go back again, like with the people closest to him, his parents or siblings?
Yes, it's not uncommon to go back and do second and third interviews. It's not uncommon for pieces of information to pop up. It's also not uncommon when speaking to people who are relatives of either a victim themselves or a perpetrator who simply don't remember everything or don't think that something that happened is important or relevant. And then it turns out to be very relevant. Like, for example, at age 8, he did this. Well, I didn't think of that. I didn't think it had anything to do with this. But then it becomes clear to investigators that we need more information from this cousin, let's say, because we heard about something that happened. It's not uncommon to go back and do second or even third interviews.
FBI Director Chris Wray has said the investigation will, quote, leave no stone unturned. And Murphy says investigators probably already know much more than they're letting on. So if investigators do know a motive right now and they're just kind of keeping it close to the vest, why may that be that they're not revealing it to the public, who obviously have a lot of questions?
Sure, there can be a lot of reasons. For example, he might be one of many people around the nation, let's say, who have decided to get together and do some sort of a campaign of violence or of political attacks. Um, or it might just be they really want to make sure they know what they know before they say it. It's hard to say. Not being inside the investigation is difficult to say, but there can be many reasons why you do not want to disclose that right away. Typically, it would be security reasons. And I would imagine that the not just the Secret Service, but Capitol Police, etc., for a variety of political figures, are all taking a look again at their persons of interest, as we call people like him.
Murphy says a motive will come out. It's just unclear when, saying someone always knows something.
Well, I think this young man, obviously very troubled. I think there's going to be a lot of information that comes out about that, whether or not he had untreated mental health issues, whether he had organic issues from birth with his brain. But this is not something that everyone seems to think someone makes a decision in 5 minutes and does this. These are well planned, thought out, obvious, intentional acts. And this individual left a trail. Everyone leaves a trail. It's called leaking. I leave it somewhere. Somebody will know something. Something will be written somewhere. It has to be. They can't keep it to themselves. It's too big.
In the days following the shooting, former President Trump appeared at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where he officially accepted the GOP's nomination for president. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.